This story is titled, My Wife Tried to Rewrite My Will to Favor My Spoiled Daughter Without My Knowledge. I found out and took immediate action. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey Reddit, this might seem like just another family story, but it's one I never imagined I'd be sharing. When you've been married for nearly 30 years, you think you know someone inside and out. You think you've built a life together on trust and shared values. But what happens when that foundation cracks, and you realize the person you thought you knew might not be who they seem? That's exactly where I found myself. So here goes. I'm Dan, 58 male, and I've spent my entire life building something I could be proud of. I grew up with nothing. My dad worked long hours in a factory, and my mom picked up whatever odd jobs she could find. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and there were plenty of times we barely made it. I remember being 10 years old and watching my parents argue over which bills they could afford to pay that month. It left a mark on me. When I got older, I promised myself I'd never live like that again. I worked hard, starting with part-time jobs in high school, then moving on to construction after graduation. Eventually, I started my own business in home renovations. It wasn't easy. There were months where I didn't know if the company would survive, but I kept pushing. Now, decades later, I have a comfortable life, a nice home, and enough saved up to retire in a few years. I married Linda when I was 30. Back then, I thought she was perfect. Smart, loving, supportive. We had 3 kids together. Mark, 32 male, Hannah, 29 female, and Sarah, 25 female. Mark and Hannah are the kind of kids any parent would be proud of. They worked hard, put themselves through school, and built good lives for themselves. Mark works in IT, and Hannah is a teacher. They've both been independent for years. Then there's Sarah, my youngest. Sarah has always been different. She's Linda's favorite, and everyone knows it. From the time she was little, Linda spoiled her rotten. If Sarah wanted something, she got it. If she made a mess, Linda cleaned it up. And if Sarah got in trouble, Linda was right there, making excuses for her. When Sarah was a teenager, she'd throw these tantrums if she didn't get her way. Not just regular teenage attitude, I'm talking full-blown, screaming, door-slamming fits. When I stepped in and set boundaries, Linda would back me off saying, "She's just a kid, Dan." Let her be. It got worse as Sarah got older. By the time she was in her 20s, she still acted like the world owed her something. For example, Sarah didn't want to work while she was in college. I told her I'd cover tuition, but she needed to get a part-time job for spending money. She promised she would, but every time I asked about it, she had some excuse. Either the job didn't work with her schedule, or the boss was mean, or the work was beneath her. Sarah would show up with new clothes or the latest phone, and I'd ask her how she managed to afford it. She'd shrug and say something like, "Mom helped me out." One evening, I brought it up with Linda. "Why are you giving Sarah extra money?" I asked her. Linda didn't even hesitate. "She's still figuring things out," she said, brushing off my concerns. I let it go at the time, thinking it wasn't worth a fight, but looking back, I realized that was a mistake. After graduation, it didn't get better. Sarah moved back home and refused to pay rent. She'd say things like, "The job market is so tough right now." Meanwhile, she was going out every weekend, buying expensive makeup and spending hours on TikTok. Linda defended her every time. "She's just trying to find her place," she'd say. "We need to support her." The thing is, I love my daughter. I want her to succeed. But there's a difference between helping someone and enabling them. And Linda couldn't see it. I've had countless arguments with her about this over the years. "You're not helping her grow up," I'd say. "You're just making her more dependent on us." But Linda wouldn't hear it. "She's our baby," she'd argue. "We're supposed to be there for her." One of the worst examples, when Sarah was only 17, she decided she wanted a brand new SUV, fully loaded. I told her she needed a steady job to afford it. But Linda jumped in, saying Sarah needed reliable transportation and brushing off my concerns about costs. A few days later, I came home to find Sarah browsing SUVs online with Linda's support. When I reminded them Sarah couldn't afford it, Linda dismissed me again, insisting they'd figure it out. I stood my ground, saying Sarah should wait until she was financially ready. Sarah sulked, Linda stayed annoyed, but in the end, the SUV never materialized. But it was a typical pattern. Sarah wanted something, Linda enabled her, and I was the bad guy for keeping things practical. That was the dynamic for years. Every time Sarah wanted something, Linda defended her needs no matter what. And every time I stepped in, I was painted as the bad guy. Now, don't get me wrong. I tried to have a relationship with Sarah. I wanted to guide her, to help her grow into a responsible adult. But she didn't like me. She saw me as the guy who said no, while her mom said yes. Still, I never imagined things would go as far as they did. I thought Sarah was spoiled, sure, but I didn't think she was capable of outright manipulation. And I definitely didn't think Linda would ever betray me like she did. It all started to unravel one evening a few weeks ago. I was in my study, going through some old files, when I noticed Linda's laptop sitting open on my desk. It wasn't unusual. She sometimes left it there, but something caught my eye. There was a document titled Revised Will open on the screen. I froze. My heart started pounding as I stared at the title. I hadn't talked to Linda about changing my will, so why was there a revised version sitting on her laptop? Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. What I saw made my stomach drop. The new will left almost everything. My business, our savings, the house, to Sarah. Mark and Hannah, who had worked so hard to build their own lives, were practically written out. And at the bottom of the document was my signature. Except it wasn't mine. Someone had forged it. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. My mind was racing. Linda had done this. It was her laptop, her document, and her plan. She'd rewritten my will, forged my signature, and tried to cut out Mark and Hannah to give everything to Sarah. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. I printed the document, slid it into a folder, and sat down in the living room to wait for Linda to come home. I didn't know how the conversation would go, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. That evening, Linda came home like it was any other day, casually setting her bag down and asking what I wanted for dinner. I couldn't hold it in. Linda, I started, holding up the paper. Do you want to explain this? She froze mid-step. Her eyes flicked to the paper, and her whole demeanor shifted. Where did you find that? She asked, her voice tight. Your laptop, I replied, keeping my tone even. The better question is why this exists. What were you thinking? Did you honestly think I wouldn't find out? She stood there for a moment, like she was deciding whether to lie or try to play it off. Finally, she said, It's not what you think. I was just drafting ideas. I thought we could discuss it. Discuss it? I raised my voice. You forged my signature, Linda. You didn't even mention this to me. This isn't brainstorming. It's betrayal. Her expression hardened as she crossed her arms. I wasn't betraying you. I was trying to do what's best for the family. Sarah deserves more than the others. She needs help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. More than the others? I repeated. Mark and Hannah have worked hard to build their own lives. Sarah, on the other hand, has done nothing but take. And you want to reward that? She's our youngest, Linda shouted back. She's had a harder time finding her way. The others are fine on their own. And whose fault is that? I countered. Every time I've tried to teach her responsibility, you've swooped in to save her. She's 25 years old and still acts like the world owes her something. And now you're trying to give her everything at the expense of Mark and Hannah? This is beyond favoritism, Linda. This is manipulation. Her face twisted into a mix of anger and frustration. You've always been too harsh on her, she shot back. She's your daughter, Dan. You're supposed to support her. I have supported her, I said, trying to stay calm. I paid for her education, gave her a place to live, and covered her expenses for years. But support doesn't mean enabling. And forging my signature to rewrite my will? That's crossing the line. Instead of apologizing, Linda doubled down. You don't understand. Someone has to look out for her. If you won't, I will. Her words were too much. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. Linda was actively working against me, justifying deceit in the name of helping our youngest. I stared at her, realizing that the woman I'd trusted for nearly 3 decades didn't see anything wrong with what she'd done. You know what, Linda? I said finally, my voice steady. This isn't just about Sarah. This is about trust. And right now, I don't trust you. Her expression shifted, like she realized the gravity of what I was saying. But instead of apologizing, she turned and walked away. I tried to keep myself calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. Was this who Linda had always been? Or had something changed over the years? Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't just sit back and let this slide. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything about the will, the forgery, and Linda's justification for it all. He didn't sugarcoat it. Dan, this is serious, he said. If she had filed that forged document, it could have caused chaos for your estate. You need to protect your assets immediately. Following his advice, I locked away my original will and all important documents in a secure safe. I also froze any accounts Linda might have access to, just in case. The more steps I took, the more real it all felt. My wife, the person I thought I could trust the most, had tried to undermine me. But things didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I noticed Linda acting differently. She started spending more time with Sarah, whispering behind closed doors and making calls she wouldn't explain. It felt like there was a whole side of her life I didn't know about. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how blind I'd been to the patterns that had been building for years. The worst part? As angry as I was, a part of me still hoped she'd come to her senses and apologize. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to end with a simple, sorry. It was bigger than that. Bigger than anything I'd ever imagined we'd face as a family. And I had no idea what to do next. Over the next few days, things at home got tense. Linda was quieter than usual, but not in a reflective or apologetic way. It was more like she was biding her time, waiting for something. She spent almost every evening at Sarah's apartment, claiming they were working on some things. She didn't elaborate, and honestly, I didn't press her for details. I was too angry and exhausted to keep fighting, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave me alone. Then, one evening, Linda left the house claiming she was meeting a friend for coffee. I wasn't convinced. For weeks now, her friendly meetups had coincidentally taken her to Sarah's place. I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left and then grabbed my keys. Sure enough, her car led me straight to Sarah's apartment. I parked a few streets away and waited. An hour later, Linda came out, carrying a stack of papers. My heart sank. I couldn't see exactly what they were, but I had a pretty good idea. The next morning, I decided I couldn't let this go unaddressed any longer. When Linda came into the kitchen for her coffee, I didn't give her time to settle. "What were you doing at Sarah's place last night?" I asked. She froze, the mug halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean?" she asked, playing dumb. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, keeping my voice steady but firm. "You said you were meeting a friend, but I saw you leave Sarah's apartment carrying papers. Care to explain?" Her face flushed, but she quickly recovered. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said, her tone defensive. "You do when it involves my estate," I shot back. "I know you're hiding something, Linda. If you don't come clean right now, I'll take legal action." That got her attention. For a split second, she looked genuinely panicked. Then she crossed her arms and said, "You're overreacting. Everything I've done is for Sarah. She needs help, Dan, and if you're not willing to support her, then I will." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you admit it?" I asked. "You're working against me to rewrite the will? You forged my signature and now you're doubling down on this? Do you even hear yourself?" "She's our daughter," Linda said, her voice rising. "She's struggled her whole life. The other two don't need anything from us. They're fine. But Sarah deserves a chance." "A chance at what?" I asked, throwing my hands up. "She's had every opportunity handed to her on a silver platter, and she's done nothing with it. You're not helping her, Linda. You're enabling her. And now you've dragged me into it with lies and manipulation." Her expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw anger replace her defensive stance. "You've always been too hard on her," she spat. "You never believed in her the way I do. All you do is criticize." "This isn't about criticism," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is about trust. And right now, I can't trust you. You've crossed a line, Linda. I don't even know who you are anymore." She turned and stormed out of the kitchen. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space she left behind, wondering how my marriage had come to this. Later that day, I called my lawyer again. "We need to move fast," I told him. I explained what I'd seen and what Linda had admitted. He sighed and said, "Dan, this is more serious than I initially thought. If she's already tried to tamper with the will and is still working on something, we need to act before she does more damage." We arranged to have a forensic expert analyze the forged document. Within a few days, the results confirmed what I already knew. My signature was fake. With this evidence in hand, I filed an injunction to block any attempts to alter or interfere with my assets. My lawyer also helped me secure tighter protections around my accounts and the estate as a whole. In the meantime, Linda's behavior only became more suspicious. She stopped trying to talk to me altogether, except for the occasional sarcastic remark. She spent most of her time out of the house, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone, texting furiously. It was obvious she was scheming with Sarah, but I didn't know what their next move would be. Then one evening, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my worst fears. Linda was in the living room, pacing back and forth while she talked. "He's on to me," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I don't know what else to do. If we don't act fast, it'll all go to Mark and Hannah, and Sarah won't get a dime." I felt a mix of anger and heartbreak. She wasn't just trying to help Sarah. She was actively plotting to cut out our other children. Mark and Hannah had done nothing to deserve this. and Linda's blatant favoritism had crossed the line into betrayal. That night, I locked up the house tighter than ever. I moved all important documents to a secure safe and changed the combination. I also installed cameras around the house, just in case. At this point, I couldn't trust Linda to respect any boundaries. The weight of it all hit me hard. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about Linda's complete disregard for our marriage, our family, and everything I'd worked so hard to build. I knew things would get worse before they got better, but I was ready to fight for what was right. I wasn't about to let her destroy everything. The realization that Linda and Sarah were actively plotting against me left me reeling. This wasn't just about a difference of opinion or a misunderstanding. This was a full-blown betrayal, and it shook me to my core. I spent the next few days going over every detail of my estate, every document, every account. I wasn't taking any chances. My lawyer had been a rock through all of this, guiding me step by step. He assured me that with the forensic evidence of the forgery and the measures we were taking, Linda and Sarah's efforts would ultimately fail. But, he warned, you need to prepare yourself. If they're already this bold, they're not going to back down easily. Meanwhile, things at home were unbearable. Linda barely spoke to me, except to hurl the occasional passive-aggressive comment. Sarah, of course, was in full victim mode. I'd catch bits and pieces of their whispered conversations. Things like, he doesn't care about us, or, we'll figure this out, don't worry. It took everything in me not to snap, but I knew better than to let my emotions take over. The breaking point came a few days later. Linda must have sensed that I was taking steps to secure my assets, because she suddenly started digging for information. She'd casually ask about my schedule or where I kept certain files. I caught her in my study more than once, rifling through drawers. Each time she'd let it slide with some excuse like, I was just looking for a pen. But I knew better. One evening, I decided enough was enough. I called a family meeting with Mark and Hannah. It wasn't an easy decision. I hated the thought of dragging them into this mess. But they deserved to know what was happening. Over coffee at Mark's house, I laid everything out. Your mother has been tampering with my will, I said, watching their faces carefully. She forged my signature on a fake document that would give nearly everything to Sarah. I've taken steps to stop it, but I thought you should know what's going on. Hannah looked stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. She did what? She asked. Why would she do that? Because she thinks Sarah deserves more than you two, I said bluntly. She's convinced herself that Sarah is entitled to everything, even if it means cutting you out. Mark, always the calm and pragmatic one, leaned back in his chair and sighed. I knew Mom favored Sarah, but this is something else. I'm not telling you this to turn you against her, I added. I just want you to be aware. If anything happens, if she tries to involve you or manipulate you, I need you to be prepared. Hannah was visibly upset, but she nodded. Thanks for telling us, Dad. I can't believe she'd do this. But we're with you. Mark reached across the table and put a hand on my shoulder. You've done the right thing, Dad. If she's willing to go this far, who knows what else she's capable of. Their support was a relief, but it also reinforced the seriousness of the situation. Linda and Sarah weren't just a threat to me. They were a threat to the stability of our entire family. When I got home that evening, Linda was waiting for me. Where have you been? She demanded. I was with Mark and Hannah, I said evenly. I told them everything. Her face twisted. How could you do that? You're trying to turn them against me. No, I was calm but firm. You did that yourself when you forged my signature and tried to rewrite my will. They deserve to know the truth. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. Linda, I've tried to talk to you. I've tried to reason with you, but you've made it clear that you're not interested in fixing this. You're only interested in protecting Sarah, no matter what it costs the rest of us. Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, If you won't help her, I will. Someone has to look out for her. I shook my head, the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to crumbling. This isn't about Sarah anymore. This is about trust, Linda, and you've destroyed it. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with filing for separation. I couldn't stay in a marriage where betrayal and deceit had become the norm. It wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about protecting my peace of mind and the values I'd spent my life trying to uphold. The next morning, Linda was served with the papers. She exploded, screaming and crying, and accusing me of abandoning her and Sarah. I stayed calm, refusing to engage in her theatrics. This is your doing, Linda, I said quietly. You made this choice when you decided to betray me. She packed a bag that same day and left to stay with Sarah. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness as the door closed behind her. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would turn out, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The fallout from my decision was swift. Linda and Sarah immediately went on a smear campaign, calling family members and telling them I was trying to cheat them out of their rightful inheritance. But I'd already prepared for this. I shared the evidence of the forged will with close family, and most of them quickly saw through Linda and Sarah's lies. The few who didn't, well, I decided they weren't worth my energy. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control of my life. But I knew the fight wasn't over yet. Linda and Sarah weren't the type to back down quietly, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days after Linda moved out were a whirlwind. She went straight to Sarah's apartment, and from there, the two of them launched an all-out offensive. I started getting calls from family members, all parroting the same lines. Why are you trying to disinherit Sarah? How could you leave Linda after all these years? Don't you think you're being a little extreme? Linda and Sarah had spun the story to make it look like I was some kind of villain. According to them, I was selfish, abandoning my family, and trying to cut Sarah out of her rightful inheritance. But I was ready for this. I'd already spoken to my lawyer, and we'd agreed to release key evidence: the forged will, the forensic report, and the steps Linda had taken, if it became necessary to defend myself. I started with my siblings. My younger sister was the first to call, sounding genuinely confused. Dan, what's going on? Linda's saying you've turned your back on her and the kids. That doesn't sound like you. It's not, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let me tell you what's really happening. I explained everything: the forged will, Linda's secretive behavior, and her blatant favoritism towards Sarah. By the time I finished, my sister was furious. She actually forged your signature? She asked. That's not just wrong, Dan. That's illegal. Exactly, I said. And now she's trying to manipulate everyone into taking her side. I'm not going to let her rewrite the truth. My sister promised to share the real story with the rest of our family, and slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The relatives who had been quick to jump on Linda and Sarah's bandwagon started distancing themselves. It wasn't just about loyalty to me, it was about the sheer audacity of what Linda had done. But Linda and Sarah weren't backing down. Sarah, in particular, ramped up her entitlement. She started posting vague, passive-aggressive messages on social media about toxic parents and how she deserved better. It was embarrassing, honestly, but I refused to stoop to her level. The ultimate push came when Linda and Sarah tried to file a petition challenging the new will. My lawyer called me as soon as the papers were filed. Dan, it's exactly what we expected, he said. They're claiming the new will is unfair and that Sarah is being denied her inheritance. What are our chances? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. They don't have a leg to stand on, he assured me. The forged will, combined with the evidence of tampering, will sink their case before it even gets started, but we'll need to be thorough to shut this down completely. I wasn't worried about losing the case. What frustrated me was how far Linda and Sarah were willing to go. They weren't just fighting for money, they were trying to destroy my reputation in the process. It was vindictive, plain and simple. The court date arrived faster than I expected. I sat in the courtroom, flanked by my lawyer, while Linda and Sarah sat across from me, whispering furiously to each other. When the judge reviewed the evidence, the forged will, the forensic report, and the testimony from my lawyer, it was clear that their case had no merit. The judge dismissed it outright, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But Linda and Sarah weren't done. After the hearing, Sarah confronted me in the hallway. "This isn't over, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You can't just cut me out of your life like this." "I didn't cut you out," I replied calmly. "You and your mother made these choices. I tried to be fair, but you've shown me time and time again that fairness isn't what you're interested in. This is on you, Sarah." She stormed off, and I felt a strange feeling. For years, I'd tried to help Sarah, to teach her responsibility, to guide her. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, I was done bending over backward for someone who only saw me as a means to an end. Back home, I began the slow process of rebuilding. I focused on spending time with Mark and Hannah, who had been my rock throughout this ordeal. One evening, Hannah came over with her husband, and we had dinner together. After the meal, she pulled me aside. "Dad, I know this has been hard," she said, her voice soft, "but I want you to know that we're proud of you. You've handled this better than I ever could have." Her words meant everything to me. After everything, I felt a glimmer of hope. I'd spent so much time feeling like the bad guy, like I was tearing my family apart, but hearing that from Hannah reminded me why I'd made these decisions in the first place. After the court case, the dust began to settle. Linda and Sarah lost their challenge, and their attempts to spin the story to the rest of the family fell flat. Once the evidence of the forged will and Linda's actions became common knowledge, most people distanced themselves from them. Some relatives still reached out to me, expressing disbelief over how far Linda and Sarah had gone, but by then, I was done rehashing the story. The facts spoke for themselves. Linda stayed with Sarah after moving out, and from what I heard, their situation wasn't great. Sarah was struggling to keep up with her lifestyle now that she didn't have Linda to funnel money her way. Linda, on the other hand, seemed to have doubled down on supporting Sarah, even though it was clearly draining her. I couldn't help but feel a mix of pity and frustration. They dug this hole themselves, but it didn't make watching them spiral any easier. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce process was swift, thanks to the clear evidence of Linda's betrayal. I was granted full ownership of my estate, and Linda walked away with a settlement my lawyer negotiated. It wasn't as much as she'd hoped for, but it was more than fair considering the circumstances. By the time the papers were signed, I felt a sense of closure. Not happiness exactly, but relief that this chapter was finally over. My relationship with Mark and Hannah grew stronger during this time. They'd been my anchor through the chaos, and I made a point to let them know how much I appreciated their support. We started spending more time together. Family dinners, weekend visits, even the occasional vacation. It felt good to reconnect with them on a deeper level, without the constant tension that had hung over us when Linda and Sarah were involved. One evening, Mark came over to help me with some repairs around the house. As we worked, he said, "You know, Dad, I never realized how much you were dealing with until all this happened. You've handled it better than I think I could have." I shrugged. "You do what you have to, Mark. That's all." "No, seriously," he said, setting down his wrench. "A lot of people would have crumbled under that kind of pressure. But you stood your ground. I hope I can do the same if I ever face something like that." His words meant a lot. I'd spent so much time questioning my decisions, wondering if I'd been too harsh or too rigid. Hearing Mark say that reassured me that I'd done the right thing, not just for myself, but for the family that truly cared about me. As for Sarah, I decided to let her go. For years, I'd bent over backward to help her, to teach her responsibility, to guide her toward a better path. But this ordeal made it clear that she wasn't interested in changing, not as long as she had Linda enabling her. I knew I couldn't force her to grow up. That was a decision she'd have to make on her own. So I stopped reaching out, stopped trying to fix things. It was painful, but it was necessary. A few months after the divorce, I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had tried to manipulate a distant relative into loaning her money. When that didn't work, she started bouncing from job to job, always blaming her bosses or her co-workers for why things didn't pan out. Linda continued to support her as best she could, but it was clear that their relationship was strained. I didn't take any joy in their struggles, but I also didn't feel responsible for them anymore. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much I'd learned from this experience. For years, I'd let guilt and obligation dictate my actions, especially when it came to Sarah and Linda. I'd convinced myself that being a good husband and father meant sacrificing my own needs, my own peace, to keep everyone else happy. But this ordeal taught me that there's a limit to how much you can give before it starts to break you. As I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of closure. My life isn't perfect. There are still wounds that will take time to heal, but I'm in a better place now. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the most growth. For anyone reading this who's struggling with family conflicts or feeling trapped in a situation they can't control, I want to say this: stand your ground. It's not selfish to protect yourself. It's necessary. Thanks for sticking until the end.